Now we're going to talk about measurable annual goals. Just like with our high incidence students, we are writing goals based on progress monitoring data that's aligned to the baseline in your present levels. Additionally, goals should be aligned to the standards. This doesn't mean that we're copying standards word for word. We may be working on a prerequisite skill, but there's a clear connection to the standard. So, when we're thinking about the goals that we're going to write for the IEP, the place where we need to start is in the present levels of performance. So, in your guided notes, you will see a present level of performance for our student Charlie. Take some time and highlight within the IEP or within the present level the audience, behavior, circumstances, degree or criterion, evaluation or method of measurement, and the frequency of data collection. All right, so to help you out, I've just highlighted the area where we have Charlie's baseline data. So it says per progress monitoring data, a need for Charlie continues to be answering comprehension questions after being read a passage with an average accuracy of 55%. So we're pulling out his baseline data and we see per adapted fifth grade content reading comprehension probes, baseline data for answering who, what, and which questions for reading comprehension, given an adaptive passage and 5 comprehension questions with corresponding pictures, is at about 50%. We often see goals about WH questions for students, specifically those with complex needs or who have low incidence disabilities. And that's an appropriate question or an appropriate goal, but it is easy to find the connection to the measurable annual goals. In order to do that, you're going to have to take a deep dive into your resources. So here are the materials. There are links in your guided notes if you'd like to go back later. But when you're writing a goal for a student, you should use the resources you have available. While our goals are not going to be word for word aligned with the standard, it is important to know where the goal falls in the standard and what is the alignment. Here we've linked the Kentucky Academic Standards, the Kentucky Cooperative Network Alternate Assessment Site, the Essential Skills Checklist that was created by Churchill Park staff, and then the Employability and Foundational Academic Standards for alternate assessment, which align with our transition needs for our students. So let's start with the Kentucky Academic Standards. Charlie is in the 5th grade. And his present level is that he's answering WH questions at about 50%. There is a reading standard for literature that would align with that data from the present level. So compare or contrast characters, settings, or events in the story or drama using specific details to analyze their interactions over the course of text. That's a lot. We're obviously not going to be able to use that standard, how it's written. So our next step would be to look at our Kentucky Cooperative Alternate Assessment site. The standards have been broken down with prerequisite skills and recommended key concepts. This was done as a collaboration with low incidence and literacy consultants across the state so that we were sure we understood the true meaning of the standard. So see the first prerequisite, identify the character, setting, and or event in a story or drama. So that's where we can start. We want our student to be able to recognize characters, settings, and events in the story. Next, we're looking at the essential skills checklist, and we can see that WH questions is something that we consider an essential skill. Next, we're going to look at the employability and foundational academic skills, or the EFAS standards. And if you look at the last one, it says knows how to listen and when to ask questions. So here is our goal. Given a 5th grade passage read to him, adapted with picture supports and modified text, Charlie will answer literal comprehension questions about character, setting, and events in the passage by selecting the correct picture from a field of 3 with 1 initial prompt with 80% accuracy over 5 sessions as measured by weekly reading comprehension probes. So it sounds like a long goal, but it's basically taking that typical WH question and aligning it to the standards and also thinking about the needs of our student. For students who are who are participating in the Kentucky Alternate Assessment, it is required that we include benchmarks or short-term objectives for those students. So I'm going to give you some examples based on the goal for Charlie that we just wrote. So one way is to do short-term objectives. And if you notice, the only difference in these goals is that I broke down, for the objectives, I broke down character, setting, and events. This is kind of an interesting way to do your objectives so that you can see where your student has strength and then also where your student might need some help. And this is breaking it down by attributes of the goal. So it's not the same as the next one, which is a benchmark. In a benchmark, we change the criteria that we're doing. So for this goal, we might say that the student will choose from a field of 3 with 4 redirections at 20%. Remember, on our goal, we wanted to get him to 80%. So if you notice, as the benchmarks increase, we're reducing the number of redirections and we're increasing the percentage that we would like to see him reach. So then we need to think about specially designed instruction. This is another huge component of the goal. And a few things with specially designed instruction, just to point out, it's what the teacher does to teach the goal to the students. There are several tools that you can use to determine SDI for the goal you're teaching. The IEP and Lesson Planning Development book, sometimes we call it the Schoolhouse document, the IEP guidance document. Those are 2 resources available. One thing also to remember is that SDI is not a laundry list. We aren't throwing out a bunch of strategies on the IEP and hoping one of them will stick. Think about Charlie's reading goal. What SDI would he need? So first thing, reading instruction using adaptive text. We already said that he needed the text adapted with pictures, so we're going to include that in the SDI. We might include systematic instruction. We may use constant time delay or system of least prompts. We talked about redirection, so we need to think about how we're going to use those prompts and redirections within the context of this goal. The JCPS Resource Teachers created a training this summer for systematic instruction. If you weren't able to attend during the Diverse Learner Institute, look for the recorded module later. Okay, so now we need to think about the special education service minutes. For Charlie, we were looking at a goal for language arts. He is currently in a special class. We can also call it a resource room. When we think about the minutes that he is going to need for us to read him the story, ask questions, and allow him time to answer them with redirections or prompts, we're estimating that it's going to take about 40 minutes per day for us to accomplish that goal. And that's what we're going to do on the special education service minutes. This does not have to equal an amount of time that a student is in a particular class period. It's really about the amount of time it's going to take us to provide the SDI and meet the goal. So now it's your turn. On pages 8 and 9 of your guided notes, you will find a present level for Charlie in math. Using the tools we've just shown you, create a math goal for Charlie, and don't forget to include his SDI. All right, so this is just a little joke. I'm not saying it's not interesting, maybe even beautiful. I just don't know what it means. And that's because progress monitoring can be difficult. And we spoke about it earlier in this session, but we're going to talk about it in relationship to the goal that we wrote for Charlie. So when we think about the criteria, we started off with the number of prompts or redirections that he's going to need in order to meet his goal. But then we also included the accuracy of the comprehension questions. So we're going to record the number of independent correct responses for him. We also want to think about the short-term objectives. How are we going to collect data on those? It's important here to remember that the data that we report for the progress report is on the overall goal, but that doesn't mean that we're not taking data on the short-term objectives because it can give us information that we might need later. So let's look at Charlie's progress monitoring, and these are on the objectives. So the first one was about him identifying characters. And if you notice, he has some pretty good progress going on. And then there's a break in instruction and he kind of goes down and he's not really moving back up that quickly. We'll talk about ESY later, and you can think about Charlie and his gap in instruction. The other thing is to look at are the number of prompts or redirections that he has. And if you notice again, after the break, he needs a lot more prompting. One thing that I also like to do when I'm taking progress monitoring, especially because our students with complex needs can have a lot of things going on in their life that might change how they're doing on their goal, you can make a note, an anecdotal note that says on a particular date, Charlie came in late from school after a doctor's appointment and he seemed tired. So that might explain why you have a drop in your data, and it might be a data point that you decide to eliminate later because it's not really a fair representation of your student's success. So we're going to go through and we're going to take data on the other parts or the other short-term objectives. So our settings and then on our events. And then finally, we're going to look at the goal overall. So this might just be one work sample. We're not taking 3 different work samples, but we are identifying on the work sample which goals go with character, which goals go with setting, etc. So at the end of it, we want to take an average of what that student earned on the overall assignment. So if you look here, you can see that he had a certain range that he was working towards. Again, he dropped off. If we go back and look at our data, we might notice that one of his areas is weaker than the other. In this case, it happens to be events. So we know that we might need to ask more questions about events, or if we're writing an IEP for the following year, we might want to include more supports around events, or a goal just about the events in the passage. So when we're working on progress monitoring data, we must show evidence of the final analysis. We want cumulative graphs, charts, and checklists, and a written summary of the analysis added to the due process record in the IEP review. Each data point must include a date. You may notice that on this graph, we are reporting the data for the goal. While you still want to graph and analyze data from short-term objectives, you'll report the data on the actual goal for progress monitoring.